Good morning and welcome to Monday Musings with the Blended Mama, gentle encouragement for busy women finding calm in the chaos. I'm Teresa and I'm so glad you're here with me this morning. Whether you are starting your week with your planner open, you are driving to work or folding laundry, or even enjoying a few quiet moments before the rest of your day gets going, thank you for spending a little bit of your Monday with me. This morning I am 6 hours ahead of or at least 6 hours ahead of where I normally am, because I'm on a work trip in Sweden, and so you are not going to see me because it is actually only 2:50 in the morning here, which is still Sunday for you guys. So, um, I'm adjusting, I guess. Anyway, so you're not going to see my face this morning, but know that I still wanted to start my day here with you guys. So this season, we have been using some of the habits from How Women Rise as a starting point for conversations about the things that can quietly hold us back. And this week, I want us to start talking about habit number 10, which is simply called too much. And when we started our book club, we kind of just looked at the titles of the chapters and the habits and thought about, without obviously reading any of the details, which ones do we think um, might apply to us. And when I first saw that title, I thought it was going to be about doing too much, taking on too many things. And I could definitely talk about that because classic overachiever, high performer, perfectionist right here, right? But that's not what this habit is about at all. So instead, this chapter is really talking about something I think a lot of women have probably experienced, and that is this strange space between feeling like we're doing too much but also worrying about somehow not enough, right? Um, just that we are too much. And so things like maybe we are too loud or too emotional, too opinionated, too enthusiastic, too direct, too fill in the blank, right? But then we're also told to speak up and be confident and use your voice, make sure people know what you think, advocate for yourself. And sometimes I can be like, okay, well, which one do you want for me? Because they feel like two opposite things, right? And so it got me thinking about, oh gosh, it was years ago, early in my career. I mean, within the first 2 years of me working for the company that I work for, I took something called the Merrill Reed Social Styles Assessment. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what it was called at the time. I had to look it up whenever I was researching for this episode because I couldn't remember what it was called. But according to Google, that's what it is. But it looks at what or goodness, I cannot speak this morning. Um, it looks at how we tend to interact with other people. And the first time I took the assessment, um, if I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure I remember correctly, but um, I came out of this assessment as something called driving amiable. And that's basically somebody who is direct and action oriented while also being relationship focused. And that sounds reasonable enough, right? I like to get things done and I like to be nice about it. And so that seems to fit, right? But then I took it again several years later. I was no longer a newbie engineer. I had experience under my belt, and apparently I had evolved. Um, and I guess I had come out of my shell, so to speak, because the second time I took it, I came out as expressive. And I hate that you can't see me right now because I'm totally talking with my hands in front of my face as I'm recording this. Um, so it wasn't just expressive. It was, one expressive wasn't sufficient to describe it. We needed two. And honestly, that tracks with who I became, who I opened up to be, and still who I am today. Expressive people tend to be enthusiastic. We show emotion. We are relationship oriented. Some people are spontaneous. I am not that. My husband will tell you that. I am definitely a planner, right? But he has helped me learn to go with the flow a little bit. Um, But when I get excited about something, I talk faster, I talk louder, my hands get involved. Like I said, my hands are totally talking, even though I know that you're not going to be able to see my face. But my face also definitely gets involved. And I have actually been told more than once, fix your face, Teresa, right? Um, and I've gotten that comment even when the camera was not turned on, because apparently, if you know me well enough, you don't actually have to see my face to know what it's probably doing. So, yes, expressive seems pretty accurate for who I am today. And for the most part, I like that about myself, right? I like to get excited about things. I like being enthusiastic. I like connecting with people. I like laughing loudly and sharing ideas. And I don't want growth to mean that I have to become quieter or more reserved or less enthusiastic just because someone else might find that version of me easier to handle, right? But there is another side to this, because being authentic doesn't mean I get to just ignore how I affect other people. So my husband and I have had multiple conversations. We've been married almost 12 years this year. And we've had multiple conversations where I have gotten louder because I am frustrated. And he takes that as me yelling at him, right? And usually I'm frustrated because I feel like I'm not being understood, right? And so I'm just getting like, because explaining it louder is going to make it better. I don't know. I mean, like even thinking through it in my head, it doesn't actually seem rational, right? But um, in my head, I'm thinking I'm trying to explain this better, but from his side, I'm just saying the same thing louder, and it can sound like I'm angry, and they aren't the same thing, right? And I could easily say, well, that's just how I talk when I'm frustrated. And that may be true. But if the person I'm talking to is receiving something completely different from me than what I'm trying to communicate, that's worth paying attention to. It doesn't mean I need to stop being expressive. I don't think I could stop being expressive. Well, actually, we'll talk about that in a minute. Um, uh, but I don't need to stop being expressive. It means I might need to become more aware of my tone. So maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to lower my volume and be intentional about what register I'm talking in. Maybe I need to stop trying to explain for a second and just listen to what they are hearing from me. And that's not becoming less Teresa. That's really learning how to communicate better and more effectively, right? And the point I want us to remember is that growth can refine you without erasing you, right? So I've had to learn the same thing professionally as well. We've already established that some of my coworkers call me No Filter Teresa, and there's definitely truth in that. I tend to be pretty direct. I am confident enough in what I know about my job to sound confident as well. And so I can be pretty direct. If I have an opinion, you're probably going to know that I have an opinion, and you're going to know what that opinion is. You'll also know the background of why I have that opinion. But I've also learned that being honest and being professional aren't mutually exclusive. And being honest doesn't mean that every thought that I have needs to come out exactly the way it first appears in my brain. I'm sure you guys have experienced that. But sometimes my words can come across more harshly than I intended. And that is something that I'm actively working on. And it's not because I need to become someone who never speaks plainly, right? But it's really because I don't want my delivery to get in the way of what I'm actually trying to say. And I think that is an important distinction for us to remember. There are going to be times when feedback isn't asking us to become someone else, right? It's just giving us information about how we are being experienced by someone else. And from that, we get to then decide, is there something I can learn from here? Is there a way I can communicate more clearly? Is my intention matching the impact it's actually having? And I think that's an area of growth, right? But I do want to talk about maybe a little interesting side topic that I feel like is a little bit interesting, because when I get to the point where I feel like someone isn't actually hearing what I'm saying, I don't necessarily get louder. Like if I'm talking and either they're talking over me or I just feel like they're not listening, and not actually hearing what I'm saying, I will eventually shut down. If I'm continually talked over, if I feel like my opinion's being dismissed, if it seems like the other person has already decided what they're thinking, we're no longer having a conversation, they just are where they are. I get to the point where I think, why am I still even trying to explain this? And then comes the fine, whatever. And if you've ever heard that from a woman, that does not mean everything is fine, right? That is definitely not in agreement with whatever was being said before I say, fine, whatever. Um, that really is me checking out of the conversation. And that does happen at work sometimes. But it definitely happens in my personal relationships. My husband knows me well enough to know that when I get to the fine, whatever, he doesn't actually let me get away with that. He will push back. He will get me to come back into the conversation and keep talking until we can actually hear each other. And I appreciate that about him. Um, Even if I'm not necessarily particularly appreciative of it in the moment, but on the back end, I am appreciative that he doesn't let me just shut down and stay shut down, right? He wants me to continue to engage in the conversation, and he's able to do it in a way that I don't take it as like an attack or anything like that. And I have realized that managing my emotional response isn't only about recognizing when I'm getting louder or when my tone isn't communicating what I intend. It's also recognizing when frustration makes me want to stop communicating altogether, because neither one of those things is necessarily going to get me where I want to go, right? Sometimes I do need to lower my volume. Sometimes I do need to slow down and I need to listen more. And sometimes I need to stay in the conversation even when I'm frustrated that I don't feel heard. And that's part of refining too, right? So again, growth can refine you without erasing you. And I think there is another side of this conversation that is worth paying attention to. So last week, we talked about the disease to please and the idea that not every request requires a yes. And if you missed that episode, go back and listen. But I think there's a connection here in this habit as well, because sometimes we're not changing our calendars to make other people feel comfortable. We're not changing ourselves to be, we are changing ourselves. And maybe that's us softening an opinion before we've even shared it, or maybe we are holding back an idea. Maybe we're apologizing before we speak. Maybe we are making ourselves a little quieter, a little smaller, a little easier to receive. And that's different than what I was just describing when I shut down because I don't feel heard. This is when we start editing ourselves before we've even given someone the opportunity to hear us. Now, sometimes adjusting our delivery is wise, but sometimes we are editing ourselves because we're afraid that the full version of who we are might be too much for someone else. And those are two very different things. And I think that figuring out the difference between the two takes some really intentional reflection and internal realizations of what it is that we're doing. And I do think it's completely normal that different people are going to get slightly different versions of ourselves, right? Or different versions of us. So the Teresa that is sitting in a professional meeting is not going to be the same Teresa that's sitting around the table with my closest friends. Um, and neither one is fake, right? Some people just make us feel safer. There are people that I can sit with and say exactly what I'm thinking without worrying that they're going to misunderstand my heart. And that's true at work and in my personal life. There are going to be other situations that require a little more thought, a little more filter, a little more awareness of how I'm communicating. And it's not that I'm being inauthentic, it's that I'm being wise in how I'm communicating. Authenticity doesn't mean showing up exactly the same way in every room. It just means that the person who's underneath all of that is still you, right? And I think that's where this habit can really connect us to this bigger thing that we've been exploring all season, that growth doesn't require becoming someone else, right? It requires knowing yourself well enough to recognize what should stay and what might need more refining. I don't want to lose my enthusiasm. I don't want to stop being expressive. I don't want to stop having opinions. And I don't want to stop laughing loudly or talking with my hands. I don't know that I could, because like that's definitely a natural reflex at this point. But anyway, but I do want to pay attention when someone I trust tells me that my tone landed differently than I intended. I want to recognize when my frustration is coming through as anger. I want to know when being direct is crossed over into being unnecessarily harsh or salty, as I like to say. I want to recognize when frustration is causing me to disengage instead of working through the conversation. And I want to keep learning how to listen and how to make sure I'm listening as much as I want to be heard. Because again, growth can refine you without erasing you. So let's kind of tie this back into planning ish. Um, and it's not necessarily planning, but it's about creating a little space for reflection. And maybe that is in your planner, maybe it's in your journal. Um, I do like to do it before my weekly planning time. So mine, and my planner is my journal. Um, but I want you to really kind of sit with this question: where am I editing myself because growth requires it? And where am I editing myself simply to make other people feel comfortable? And that's not necessarily an easy question, and it's going to take some time for you to sit and think through it, because sometimes the answer is, yep, I need to work on that. And sometimes the answer might be, no, this is part of who I am, and I don't need to apologize for it. And both of those things can be true, but you have to um, decide how you can receive feedback without allowing every person's opinion to become an instruction manual for how you're supposed to be, right? You can receive the feedback and not necessarily change who you are, but maybe change how you're showing out, showing up. Um, you can adjust your delivery without silencing your voice. You can become more self aware without being self conscious. And so that's where I'm going to bring us into our gentle step for this next week. And I really want you to notice one moment this week where you are tempted to hold back something that genuinely needs to be said. And instead, I want you to pause. I want you to think about what you actually want to communicate. And I want you to think about how you want to communicate it. And then I want you to actually say it. Not louder, not softer, but intentionally. Because, my friend, you have to be authentically you. And that doesn't mean you can't accept feedback, and it doesn't mean you don't need to make adjustments. But it also doesn't mean you get to dismiss someone's feelings by saying, well, that's just how I am. You also can't spend so much time worrying about how something might come across that you never say it, because it's important for your voice to be heard. And there is a sweet spot somewhere between too much and not enough. And I don't think that we find it by trying to become the version of ourselves that everyone else finds easier to accept. I think we find it by knowing who we are, listening to the people that we trust, paying attention to our impact, and continuing to grow. You don't need to erase the parts of yourself that make you uniquely you. Maybe some of those parts just need a little refining. I know mine do. I will be the first to raise my hand. Um, but I truly believe that growth can refine you without erasing you. And I feel like I am in a period of growth and a season of growth. And I hope that you will stay with me for this journey. So, thank you for spending a few minutes with me today, um, especially with, I'm sure, like, I do one take on these videos, and you definitely got um, the very early, it is now after 3 a.m. here in Sweden. Um, and you definitely got the unfiltered version of me this morning. But if this episode encouraged you, I would love for you to share it with another woman who has ever wondered whether she was a little too much and somehow still not enough. You'll find some links in the show notes to learn more about the Purpose and Progress Place, our membership group. and also explore some of my favorite planning and journaling resources. Until the next time, friend, be yourself, stay willing to grow, and remember, growth can refine you without erasing you. I will see you next Monday, and until then, plan with purpose and coordinate that chaos. And I will see you right back here next Monday.